So I have this personal rule for myself. If something scares me, I have to do it. So about 5 minutes before I guess announced the stream or made it public, I was I made the thumbnail. I'm sitting here debating, and I just clicked go and just kind of went for it. So doing streams alone kind of makes me super nervous. But yeah, um, whoever's in the chat, you want to just jump on in. I want to see who's here. I'll just give it a few minutes here, and I just want to do something casual today. So while we're live here, let me see what's going on here. What's up, Michael? See Universal in the chat here. So yeah, I kind of want to make this an open Q&A here too, and I'll just kind of go through my quick story. I'm sure a lot of people know it, but hey, Mark Anthony, Zane, good to see everyone here. Okay, we got about 60 people right now. So what I did is I actually linked up a quick, I guess, article. It's not really an article, but let me just pull this up really quick. It's actually in the video description. Here, let's just share my screen. Let's do screen one. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to write up, I guess, something that you can actually follow. So it's not an article, it's just the list here, but I'll kind of go down that too, and I'll go through the chat. So let's actually start with the chat here. So let's see. A lot of people pouring in. It might be available afterwards, I see. So Stefan, I see you're asking if the streams are going to be available after. If it is, or if it goes well enough, I'll post it. But yeah, we'll see. Okay, so let me just jump on into this. Actually, I'll just, I guess, put it on my face here. So that article is linked down. I'll probably add to it. Maybe I might just add some more descriptions to it and elaborate a little bit. And by the way, if the focus is not on my face, let me know. It seems like that light back here is kind of throwing it off, but we'll see. So let me try to get the camera in focus. Cool. So yeah, I'll go down this path, and I kind of got this idea actually from Cody Seabar, I believe his last name is, and he put out a full I guess video. It's a Fullstack series where he's basically talking about Fullstack development and going through all those paths. And everybody always has their roadmaps, and I'm sure we've all seen those. So what I want to do is actually just give you mine, because it's not really a roadmap. It's just been my experience. And I know that seeing stories like this can actually help guide people and understand that there is not one perfect way of doing things, I guess. So I'm sure a lot of people know, and this is going to be like the pre-start of the roadmap here. And in that article, I actually dashed the lines. So a lot of people do know the story about Wix, because that is where I actually got my start. So Wix was basically the way that I started. I got into web development because I tried to build out a website. I really wanted to get into affiliate marketing. And then I also have shared the story about the locksmith website that I built out using Wix. So basically, I just wanted to put together a website, and that was like how I got into it. So I guess I can't really say that's part of the roadmap, but that's where I got started. And in that process is where I started learning about WordPress, because Wix was kind of limited. So I learned about WordPress, and after using WordPress, I can't really remember at this point how long it was. Maybe it was a couple of months. Maybe it was even a full year. But basically, I went from WordPress into wanting to customize my themes. If you ever worked with WordPress, you'll notice that it's kind of limiting in what you can actually do as far as the actual themes. Certain plugins, maybe once somebody styles something, you really can't do anything with it unless you actually know how to code. So my, I guess, roadmap, or the path, I guess, started at trying to customize my WordPress websites. And that's where I started with HTML and CSS. Now, I picked up the book HTML and CSS by John Duckett. And what I did is I actually started at HTML, just like the book kind of tells you to. I learned about the basics of how the web works, because there is that description in the beginning of the book. And I just kind of went through the basics, like adding some text on screen, building out a form, little things like that, understanding what a div was, how to create lists, ordered list, unordered list, and that. And HTML was really like a couple of days only. So that one, as far as the checklist goes, I'll just go back to the screen. That was right here. And that was really, really fast. And again, this is linked up in the description. I just wanted to write these out so we can have like a visual representation. So HTML took like about a week. Pretty simple to understand. I know there's more to HTML, but just to get started to figure that out. And in that book, in the next step was CSS. So CSS, spent a couple of weeks on that. It was a little bit more intuitive, and HTML and CSS do go hand in hand. So you kind of need one, or you need both, I guess, to really do something with it. So that was really it. I learned CSS and HTML in about a month, I believe, and I continued to develop WordPress websites. So it really wasn't that long until, or it wasn't really that quick before I moved on to the next step, because this was just for WordPress. Now you'll notice on that list right here, we go on to Python. So at this point, there was probably about a year or so in between this, between HTML and Python, or a couple of years actually, maybe two, between those two. So I started developing the WordPress sites, and in CSS, I continued to make myself better there, continued to improve, learning layouts, how to, I guess, have better format, learning about how to make things responsive and so on. So that was CSS. Now, when I wanted to become a full stack developer, that's where I started going into Python here. So it was about 2017. It was the end of 2017, and I really wanted to go into full stack development. So I already knew HTML and CSS, Wix and WordPress. And Python was the language that I heard you can do something with. So I started looking up, hey, what do companies build websites in? What do they use? And I just kept hearing Python. And at this point, I didn't realize that there was things like frameworks. I really didn't know what that was. So I jumped into Python. And once I kind of learned the basics, and there was about a month of Python once I really started feeling comfortable with it. I didn't master it by any means, but I started feeling comfortable with Python. So I kind of went into Python, figured that out, and I realized, hey, there's these two frameworks that I probably should look into, and that was Django, and the other one was Flask. And there was some time in between trying to figure those out, but I ended up jumping into Django, and that's where I spent a couple months learning about Django, and then Postgres, Heroku, how to deploy a site. So at this point, if you notice that I haven't learned JavaScript yet, because typically you see the HTML, CSS, and then you'll see JavaScript, and then the standard roadmaps that you see nowadays are usually just going to point to React Next or Vue, Angular, one of those. But mine was going into Django. Now, I didn't learn JavaScript until I needed it. I really didn't think I needed it at that time. I tried to build my application with just, I guess, Django and using HTML and CSS, but I started noticing that the websites that I was building, or the website that I was working on, there were certain things that I needed JavaScript for to actually enhance it. Things like user interactions. I was trying to, at one point, I was trying to render out a table, and if there were certain items that were complete in a checklist, I wanted them to be red, and then the other ones to be, let's say, blue or something like that. So that's where I needed JavaScript to toggle items on a website, to make things like a modal pop-up, and really just to manage state. So I didn't learn JavaScript until after Python, Postgres, Django, and Heroku, I guess, in that little stack there. So yeah, after that, that was when JavaScript came in the picture. Spent probably longer than anything else on JavaScript, because JavaScript out of all of these was definitely the toughest for me. It was pretty easy to pick up Python. It was pretty easy to understand Django for me, but that's where there's just so much with JavaScript that you can do. And today I still not struggle with it, but it's still the area where I'm definitely not the most fluent. So yeah, after JavaScript, I actually got to a point where if anybody has ever tried to build out applications just using vanilla JavaScript, if you ever build out an API, it can get really messy. And I saw this picture. It was like a picture of like an overloaded dumpster. It was on Twitter actually. And it was this dumpster. It was overfilling with trash. And somebody posted what your website looks like when you try to build it with vanilla JavaScript. And that's kind of how I felt, because you can definitely build it with just knowing JavaScript. That's totally fine. But once your application starts needing to manage state, and I know that some people may not understand what that is. If you don't, go ahead and ask it. I'll try to elaborate on that. But basically, things like user interactions, trying to understand what a user was doing on the website and trying to respond and actually bring up things like charts. Because if anybody, or if you've heard about the application that I built, there were these like test results that we had to map out. So anytime a user would search something or change the date, we needed a state to update immediately in the application, re-render certain data, and so on. And that's where JavaScript alone got really tough. So that's where React really came in the picture here. So let me just pull this up. So that was really all that there was in my entire roadmap. It wasn't those long, let's see, I'll just Google one up right now. I'll just do full stack developer roadmap. So I just want to pull this up, and this is kind of what I'm referring to. There was these, did I spell that right here? Let me just go to images here. I'll just pull something up. So it was kind of like one of these where there were like these side things, but you'll see something like this. So let me just open this up all the way. And if I'm going down this list, my route didn't go like this right here. I learned HTML and CSS, and then Python got in the picture. So for those of you that feel like you have to go directly or step by step on one of these, is definitely not the case. Everyone can have their own route here. Let me just go through this. I didn't learn Bootstrap until I learned about JavaScript. That was around the same time, so that didn't come till way later. I never learned about Material CSS or Semantic UI. Never learned TypeScript. Anything right here with NPM scripts, gulp, grunt, anything like that. Never picked that up in my early stages. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm just going through these, and I can see that the highlighted ones are the ones that you probably want to focus on more. But even that, it was definitely not the same. And I picked up a lot of these along the way. Like nowadays, I'm actually learning about Material CSS right now, actually. But they weren't in that traditional roadmap that you're seeing. Mine was pretty straight. It was just as simple as this: HTML, CSS, Python, Django, Postgres, and Heroku, JavaScript, and React. So that pretty much sums it up. And that was in the time span of, I guess these three were in about, I would say 8 months or so, maybe about a year it took me to really grasp all of those before I started using them. So I'm just going to jump back into the comments section, and we can talk about, I guess, anything. I want to stick to maybe the developer roadmap, but we can kind of jump around here. So let's see. I'm going to go into the comments section, and this is my first time trying to hold down the fort with a live stream, so I don't have somebody to bounce back and forth with. Somebody's asking, is React secure? It's as secure as you make it. That's all up to the developer to secure their application, to do things like form validation. I am actually having Ben Awad on my channel next Thursday, and we're going to be talking about this, specifically about HTTP only cookies, JSON web tokens, and so on, and how to store those. And that's a topic I want to get into, is security too. So we'll be breaking that down. Django plus React roadmap. That's pretty much what my roadmap was. It pretty much led into that. React is still the #1 front-end framework that I'm using. I'm sticking to that. I still prefer Django because I love building out APIs. I still rarely, or at this point, I rarely build out just vanilla Django websites, if that makes sense, where I'm just building out like the standard Jinja template rendering and so on. I'm rarely doing that. I'm mostly focusing on React right now. Let's see. So is Postgres the best database to work with Django? Yeah, Django, I mean, in theory, you can make anything work, but Postgres is really built into Django already. Django's basically built around it with their ORM, and it's the one that flows seamlessly with it. I prefer relational databases. I'm not really no SQL person. I can't really get myself into that. So yeah, it's kind of challenging for me. Not challenging, but it's just not familiar to me. And by the way, for those of you that are trying to see that article, or I guess that short little post, it's linked up, but if you want to find it, you can actually just go to my website. And this is actually one product that is built with standard Django here. So let me pull it up. Just have the analytics open there. If you go to DennisIV.com, I just wrote this up a couple of seconds before the stream. And if you go to view more post, so this site's actually built in Django. It's a full stack application. If I go to one of these, it's on the second page, I believe. And for now, what I'll do is I'll actually feature this post. So if I go to edit here, I can actually, this is my own interface where I have my rich text editor where I linked everything up. I'm going to feature the post, and it should be on the home page now. Okay, so now if we go back here, I guess I need to adjust one of these. Let me just take this one off as a featured post. So we'll remove that because I'm only allowing, at this point, I'm only allowing 3 featured posts on the homepage. Okay, so there we go. So my full stack developer path, and I'll probably write more about that. So let me just go back to full screen. Okay, so let's see. About to start my full stack dev internship. Very nervous. Any advice? What do you mean by full stack developer internship? Are you taking on an internship as a full stack developer? I'm assuming that's what you mean there. If you're going into that, I would say ask a lot of questions, but don't ask ask leading questions. I guess that's the best way to say it. So if you're in an internship or any job you apply for, anybody that I've ever hired, I've loved people that can ask a leading question where they're looking for a solution. So an example would be something like I'm actually working with a few developers on the Mumble team, for anybody that knows that project, and I have one developer that always reaches out to me, and his name is Praveen. Actually, Praveen, if you're watching, shout out to you. And anytime he's trying to ask me for advice or a direction, he's always given me the answer or a partial answer in advance. So that means when you're stuck on a solution, don't just ask somebody, hey, how do I do this? Say, I'm stuck here. I'm trying to figure this out. This is what I've done up until this point, and I think I can go this direction, but what's your advice? So if that makes sense, you're trying to show that you're already looking for the answer. You've already come up with your solutions or a direction, but you just need guidance there. And if you're doing that, anybody that's working with you would love to work with you. That usually shows that you're going to do your research on your own, and an employer or anybody that's a tech lead would love to have somebody like that. So let's see. So somebody's asking, what is Django exactly? So trying to put this into non-technical terms. So I guess in a technical way, Django is a framework, and it makes for building applications easier using the Python language. So it's a front end, not a front end framework, it's a web framework. And basically it's kind of like a package where you have compiled code and bits of code that make building an application a lot easier and a lot faster. So it's a framework that basically helps build things easier. That's one way I can summarize it. So code with Tommy. Tommy, what's up, man? So definitely DRF. Or the Django REST framework, because I don't like to use acronyms too much. I haven't used Fast API, but the Django REST framework is so nice that I don't see any reason not to use it. It's there's just so much that goes into it. Authentication so easy with it. It works seamlessly with Django, so I don't see any reason why I should use Fast API, but I'll still have to look into it. Someone's saying 2 times speed is not working. That's because I'm live. I can't talk that fast. Let's see. Okay, so do you plan on creating a tutorial about deploying channels over HTTPS? At some point, it's not in the near future, but at some point I think I will. It's just not something that I've been able to go into. So somebody's asking if Flask is a viable framework. So how viable is Flask as a framework? Do you recommend transitioning to learn Django when you are very familiar with web development fundamentals? Is Flask common in the industry? So Django is going to be more commonly used. That's for sure. A lot of big companies use it. Dropbox uses it. Udemy uses Django. Pinterest, Instagram, and if they have advanced, they still use it in some part of their application. By the way, let me turn off that light. I feel like it's kind of interrupting the focus here. So give me a second. Let's see if that makes it better. So yeah, I guess to get back to that, Flask is definitely more lightweight. A lot of people like it because it's simpler to set up, but the way I see it, unless you're trying to completely customize everything and build everything out from scratch, I don't really see a reason why not to use Django. Django just comes with so much more. I don't think Flask is bad at all, but Django is built and more, I guess, stress tested by the bigger companies. There's just so much more support for it. So I would recommend it, but I think Flask is a viable option. I've seen good applications built with it, but Django is it just makes more sense in most cases that I've seen. My brother trolling me, calling me a nerd here. Let's see. Can I create a custom API using Django? Yes, you can. I think if that's the question you're asking for, can you just build an API using Django? So if you look at Mumble, let me pull this up actually. This is that open source project we're working on, and we're still having some issues with it before the MVP, but we built out the part of Django, or the part that Django runs in this application is the backend API. So we built out the only part that Django is using is for the API authentication to provide the data, and that's it. So Django's core job is to serve the API. Other than that, React is taking care of everything else. That's the front end, and they're even hosted separately. So the back end is hosted on this is on Heroku, and then the front end is on Versal. So yes, you can build out great APIs using Django. And then I see this question. Can Django work with MongoDB? Yes, it can. There is a package called, let me see, it was Django, I believe. So Mongo, but with a D, with a DJ. I think that's how it is. And it basically helps connect to Django. I've never used it. I'm really curious on how that would work with Django's models, because here you have a relational database, but now you're using something like MongoDB, which is a NoSQL, so it's not the same thing. So I really don't know how that integration works. And I see a donation. Jonathan, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Wow. Thank you. So let's see. What's the point of learning coding as tools like WordPress exist? This is thought that is demotivating me. So wow, I can't talk. So this is a really good question, actually, because it depends on what route you're going. I always hear the route of, or people go in the direction of saying, oh, well, code or machine learning or AI will replace developers and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of nonsense. But to answer this question, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to freelance and get a couple of coffee shops as a website, or like these small businesses, and you're just trying to provide basic static applications, maybe they're not fully static, but simplified applications, then there's really no reason to learn coding unless you want to learn HTML and CSS. I think even that with WordPress is good because you can customize applications. But on its own, go ahead and just stick to WordPress if that's what your goal is. But if you're trying to go above and beyond that and try to build out real applications, let's just say some accounting firm comes to you and they manage a bunch of clients, and they want to build out this entire database where they can modify customers, add information about customers, almost like a CRM. They want it fully customized. A CRM is not an option. They can't use Zoho because it doesn't have the features, and they're coming to you and saying, hey, I will give you, or they'll come to you and say, hey, can you build this application? We have a budget of, let's say, $30,000 or $50,000. If you don't know how to code, if you don't know anything beyond WordPress, you're not going to be able to build that. But any application like that, like let's say Mumble, let's say you wanted to build out a social network, let's say you want to build out the next Facebook or the next Twitter, you're going to need to learn how to code. You can't build this in WordPress. Now for freelancing, that's where that example comes in, because one of these people may come to you and say, can you build this out? Where you may see an opportunity like that. So that's where learning how to code gives you an advantage, because you can build out more complex applications. You just have more freedom to do what you need. So I hope that answers your question. It really depends on what you're trying to do. Okay, let's see. Dennis, I'm on my way to learn Django. Now I'm on Dino.js and Node.js stuff. Can you suggest a path to get into Django? What exactly is the important information part to learn Python and Django? So Dino, that's funny to hear that. I haven't heard that one in a while since Dino went crazy like Bitcoin. If you're trying to get into Django, I would just say start with Python, get the basics there. And I do have a video on that. And it's basically what you need to learn before Django. And it's basically the basic fundamentals of Python. You want to learn about classes, functions, variables, that kind of stuff. So once you get into that, if you're into Node already, that should be quick to pick up. You're just learning syntax. And let me actually turn this light on really quick. Sorry, it's actually bothering me that it's not on. Sorry, everybody. So yeah, the basic syntax, once you pick that up, I would say start there. There's a lot of good tutorials out there. Corey Schaefer is one that I can recommend. But from there, when you're learning Django, I have courses out there. There's a lot of courses on Udemy, on YouTube. Just go ahead and start with the basics. And if you're starting with Django, you're going to want to learn about rendering a simple page here, how to handle URL routing, how to render static files. Go through those basics. Once you do that, that's where I would recommend you just start following tutorials and try to build out a couple of applications. So don't overthink it. Start with Python but don't try to master Python. If you have the time, do it, but there's no need to try to learn everything there is to know about Python. I think with somebody like your experience or somebody with your experience, if you already know Node, Python should be maybe 2 weeks to pick up at that point, depending on what you're putting into it, but you should be able to get the fundamentals and move on. Let's see. So how do I get a decent job by Django and Python? So I guess this would go back more into knowing how to market yourself, knowing how to provide value, whether that's with a good resume, having good projects on your portfolio. I mean, there's plenty of jobs out there that have both of those. I know that from experience. I've applied for jobs like that. I've been offered positions with using Django and so on. But yeah, I would say if you can make yourself stand out, that's it. I'm trying to give you an example of how to stand out. I mean, if you're like right now, I'm actually hiring some people from the open source project, the Mumble project. And those people were really easy to hire because they've contributed to my project. I know what their work is like, and they've proven that they can work in teams. So it's really easy for me to hire people like that. So that's just one example is if you're participating in something, but internships are a great way to just try to figure out the market, ask questions. How much time so I wanted to answer this one too. So how much time do I need to get a job using Python or Django? If you know it already, you can start right now, start applying, start going. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. I would say time is irrelevant here as long as you can build out applications and you can bring something to the table to whatever company you're looking to apply to. Future of Django. I kind of like this one because I see people go the other route and trying to, I guess, dog on Django. But Python is only growing. It's only growing, especially with people that are more at their beginner stages. It's only advancing. So I don't see any reason why Django would go away. As Python grows, it kind of pulls Django with it, and Django grows in popularity because of that. So if you're thinking it's going to get replaced by Node.js or anything like that, I do think there's competition there. But no, I think as Python grows, Django being the #1 framework with Python, it'll continue to scale. And I don't see any reason it would go away anytime soon. Let's see. So just trying to go through the comments. Fast API and GraphQL or DRF. I'm going to be biased here and I'm going to say DRF. I don't think GraphQL is a way to integrate with this kind of stuff or with APIs, but I don't know it well enough, and I don't know Fast API well enough to really work with that. So let's see. Could you please make a video on React Django integration and deployment? I have a full Udemy course on this topic where we build out an e-commerce website from start to finish, fully deployed. So I'd recommend you check that out. I might put together a simpler application on YouTube just to show that deployment process. But really, once you integrate Django with React, it's all just about deploying a Django application if you're trying to have Django host it. Best tech stack for Django developers. So for me, I think this is always subject to opinion here, but for me, it's Django on the back end. Obviously Python comes with that. I like to use React on the front end. So once I build out an API using DRF, I connect that to a React application. I use Postgres as my database. I love Postgres. I usually host my static files on AWS using the S3 buckets. I put my Postgres database on AWS, and then I guess obviously JavaScript comes with that if I'm using React. So I think that kind of sums it up. So I called it the Pern stack, I believe. It's not the official term, but it's Postgres, not the Pern stack. What was it? Okay, I can't think of the name, but Django and React is kind of what I stick to. Okay, let's see. So I have this idea of a web application where students can upload school notes and exchange the, is it possible? So exchange notes, or I'm assuming. Yes, 100%. This is what Django can do. So you would basically upload notes and exchange them. So basically what I would see it is almost like a social network where you can have like your own interface, you create your notes, you upload those, that's simple CRUD operations. And let's say you want to exchange those notes. That can almost be like a friend on a social network or a follow where you can have somebody request to view your notes. And then once you accept that person, they can view all your notes or you can limit what they can see. But yeah, that's 100% what Django can do. Let's see. So on your recent project, Mumble, does it have real-time notification and channels? No, not at this point. So we're actually facing somewhat of an issue with Mumble right now. We are working on the back end. So on the front end, you'll notice certain things are not displaying here and images aren't working. But we are going to add in instant notifications, posting. Basically, when you make a post, it'll automatically update. And we're going to probably do that using channels. So yeah, it will have it at some point. We just haven't had the chance to integrate that. So how can I contribute to your open source project? I probably should have linked that up, but you can go into the video where I announce it. There should be a Discord server link. If not, just go to GitHub and you can comment on it, raise an issue that maybe the Discord link doesn't work if it doesn't, but go ahead and go there. And let me just pull that up. So start with GitHub and then you can just join from there. So join the Discord server, raise an issue, and you can contribute. So I just posted that in the chat. So that's the link to the GitHub repo. And if you look through the README file, so let me just open that up. So here's the link. It's github.com/divanov11 and then /mumble. So if you go to the repo or the README file, you can go to Mumble community. This is where you can join that Discord server. So continue to Discord, and this is where that'll pull up. So let me just close that out. But yeah, it's pretty simple. Just find something that you can work on, raise an issue, talk to somebody that's working on a part of the application, and see what you can offer. Okay, I keep seeing this question. Try not spamming this. I know you're trying to get your question answered, Inkit, but Python Django developer scope in 2021. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Are you just looking at what's going to be occurring with this? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking there. Okay, has there been a time when using Node.js was better than Django for one of your projects? Yeah, live chat. Django is not really built that well for that, and that's where we can even use Node.js as a microservice for that. We're not sure, but if you look at the Mumble project, we are gonna, I guess we took it off for now, but we are gonna have an instant messaging feature. And I believe Node.js has better integration when it comes to WebSockets and how that functions. So that's one area where I would say Node.js definitely outdoes it. So let's see, which Django caching backend do you use for production projects? At what level? Template views, full site, etc. That's something that we've integrated into the Mumble project. I am not part of that, and it's one of my weaknesses. I'll admit that. Caching, when it comes to these applications, it's not something that I'm an expert in, so I won't be able to give you the best answer there. Sorry. Okay, so what's the difference between Django and Django REST framework? Django is the backend framework. We'll just put it that way. It's where you can basically build out the entire application. You can build out your database. Any kind of pages you want to render, you can do basically anything when it comes to Django as far as just rendering out content and performing CRUD functionality. So creating, update, deleting stuff. You can build out an application with Django. Now, where Django REST Framework comes in is it's like a layer on top of Django, and it makes for building out APIs better using Django. So once you build out your application to use a Django REST Framework, you're going to use Django first. You're going to build out your application. You're going to build out the database, create the endpoints, and then you'll integrate or layer Django REST Framework on top of that. And then you'll have to serialize the data. So serializing, that means turning things into JSON data, and you just put it on top of your Django application. So they work hand in hand, and Django REST Framework is for creating the API part of your Django application. So the endpoints, the data, and so on. So this one's kind of interesting. I'm a self-taught developer with no prior job experience. What should I put on my resume? This is, if you have no job experience, if you have nothing, this is going to be tough. If you don't have projects, I would start there. I would start with projects, just building stuff out on the side and getting some internship experience if you can do that. I would start there. It's hard to hire somebody without any experience. Now, I've hired people that were complete beginners, but that is a very unique situation. Most companies will not hire you unless they're actually looking to develop somebody. Nobody wants to be tested on, I guess. They don't want to try you out. It's risky. It's costly. They're going to have to put money into you. They'll have to hire a senior developer that's highly paid to train you. So if you don't have that, I would say get projects on your resume, on your portfolio sites, or whatever you decide to do there, and try to also get the internships. That's where I would start, because anybody that doesn't have that experience, I would be hesitant to hire. So this is an interesting one. Is there an easy way to read Django documentation? I feel lost if I go there. Can you suggest a relative site where I can read simply? So I had a hard time. So I think Django's documentation is some of the best documentation I've seen, probably compared to React. It's also really good too, but it can be confusing in the beginning. So when I started off with tutorials, because when you're reading the documentation, they're still speaking in a language that's not familiar to you. Now, developers that are more experienced in reading documentation may be able to follow it, but I'm assuming you're probably in your more beginner stages of your development career. So I would recommend trying to follow some kind of tutorial. There's articles. Simple is better than complex.com. It's a good website, but those are going to be articles on individual concepts. So I would say follow tutorials. Once things start becoming more familiar to you, go back and forth between the documentation and the tutorial, and eventually it'll start making sense. So that's the best way I can say it. I don't know a better version of it. I would just say stick to tutorials, because they are simplified and they're usually meant to be almost a layer on top of documentation. But it will make sense at some point. If you stick with it, documentation will start to make more sense to you. So can I use Vue with Django instead of React? Yes. It's just a front-end framework. Once you build out the API, you can simply connect it or just call the API. You can completely separate them as two different applications. Django doesn't have to prop up, any specific front-end framework. You can have Django completely elsewhere, just call the API endpoints, and you can use Angular, React Native. If you're building out mobile applications, Flutter, anything like that, doesn't matter as long as you have the API. No, I have not been into machine learning. It's a topic that's really interesting to me, but I have not had the chance to study it. Okay, so what is an API? Easy way, with an example, please. Let's just put it this way. Let's say you have an application, or you have some data, and somebody else wants to build out their own application. Let's say they're trying to build out a website and they're trying to track, let's say, jobs out in the market. They want to create almost like a job posting board. And let's say this person that's trying to build out this job posting board doesn't have their own data to actually provide. They don't want to put in data into a database. They just want to be able to call some kind of endpoint and retrieve data. So an API is simply put a way of displaying data and a way of providing ways to interact with an application. So let me just look up an example here. So let me try to Google this up and let's see what happens. And this probably, I don't know if this will make sense right here, but I just looked this up. I looked up this endpoint. And let me just try to open up this image. So you call any kind of endpoint. Let's say you have your own application, but somebody says, hey, you can use my data. All you have to do is call this URL. So in this case, we have a URL. There's a variable set there. And when you type in, let's say that's website.com/v2/features right here. When you call that endpoint, this is the data you get. So you're just retrieving that data, and then you can render that out in your application however you want. You don't have to worry about how it's made, who provides that information. You're simply just getting back that data. So that's a simple, probably the most simplistic way of explaining that. And I probably need to find a better way to elaborate on that, but it's a way to provide and interact with data that maybe isn't yours. And it could be yours too, but it helps communicate between applications. Okay, let's see. Okay, what are the difficulties that you faced when learning stuff like Django, HTML, and CSS? So the most difficult part, I guess, was in the very, very beginning was understanding concepts. So like requests and responses. A lot of people or a lot of tutorials, when you start them, kind of assume you already know how the web works. I needed to understand how that worked. In tutorials, you'd hear concepts like calling a certain endpoint and using this kind of protocol to get this route, right? That made no sense to me. What the heck does that mean? Once I started understanding what a request was, like a request is pulling up a certain URL, you send a request, then you get back a response. So understanding those kind of concepts was pretty difficult. When it comes to CSS, I would have to say layouts was the hardest part. The concept of CSS really made sense to me. You create HTML elements, and then you create identifiers and classes for those elements, and you style them. That's easy. You make a button, a box, backgrounds, whatever. When it comes to layouts, that's difficult because you're starting to have to work with responsiveness, making applications responsive for mobile, I guess, but layouts in general, having to adjust content and having it respond to a specific size of a browser and so on, and getting things to be positioned where I want them to be. So in CSS specifically, absolute, fixed, and relative positioning really confused me. And then when it comes to JavaScript, DOM manipulation was very easy. So manipulating the DOM, but actually making the API calls, returning back promises, what you might understand as callback hell, people will reference, that kind of stuff was pretty confusing to understand, and how to actually work with the APIs. Those are things that I struggled with. When it comes to Django, I don't know if there's any concepts that were really too difficult. Maybe authentication was kind of tricky. Understanding sessions, that's one of those concepts that was hard to understand in the beginning, just like the requests and responses. But sessions and tokens, these concepts were really tough to grasp. So I had to spend a lot of time just trying to tackle those on their own outside of Django. Let's see, it looks like my chat just scrolled too quick here. Okay, so why use React over Django's templating engine? It seems like extra work. So the answer that I like to give for this is when you face the problem, you'll know it and you'll know what to do. So without trying to just give that kind of answer, in most applications, if you're just trying to create basic or perform basic CRUD operations, Django is going to be fine. Even using a little bit of JavaScript will work. But once you're starting to interact, let me try to give you an example here, interact with content. So right here, let's say I make a post on Mumble, right? Let's say I write up a post and I hit go. So if I hit Mumble now, what needs to happen here? If I don't use any JavaScript, let's say we're not even going the React route, we're just not even going to use JavaScript. I need to render this data. So if I don't use JavaScript, I'm going to have to completely reload the page, therefore reloading all of the data in this page. So that's if I don't use JavaScript. That means I'm not using Ajax here. If I try to update this data with JavaScript, because that's the only way to update it without refreshing the entire application, if I try to do that, what about these items right here? What about all this data? This data might need to know about what's going on. It might need to know what's going on in other application or other parts of the application. So managing how the application talks to other parts of it gets really difficult with Django because you're talking about page refreshes. You're having to reload the page anytime you need a new set of data. But once you're starting to work with request and response as far as like asynchronous type of stuff, that's where React really thrives. Because let's say, here's an example. Let's say this user, so Sharir right here, let's say I can follow Sharir. When I follow him, what if Sharir is recommended in the top contributor section? This follow button also needs to be able to be updated. So the application needs to know about that. And using something like React really helps with state management. So, but the shorter answer is when you run into the issue, you'll know it. Django can be really, really limiting on its own. Which deployment site do you prefer? I use Heroku quite a bit. I also use AWS, but I usually use them in sync. And I believe Heroku is actually an AWS product. So AWS actually owns Heroku, I believe. What qualities do you look for when hiring a Django developer or any developer, I guess? I would say somebody that looks for solutions and is I know this is kind of a stereotypical answer, but somebody that looks for solutions on their own and can be an asset rather than somebody that I have to micromanage in a team. So the best type of employee that I can imagine or that I've ever had is somebody that provides me with a problem. Let's say our server is down and they say, hey, our server is down, the site's not working. Instead of saying, what do you do? It's somebody that goes forward and says, this is what we're going to be doing to fix this. So somebody that leads by default. They don't have to be a leader or a project manager, but somebody that can jump forward, figure stuff out. If they don't know an answer to a problem, I've had people where they just will respond and say, well, I don't know that, I can't do that. Somebody that can say, I don't know this, but I'm going to go ahead and try to study this and I'll try to have this figured out for you by tomorrow. So somebody that can really assist the team rather than drag it down and ask questions. So yeah, that's probably the best way I can answer that. Heroku is now a Salesforce company. I didn't know that. Actually, I think I've seen that somewhere. I wasn't sure exactly what the deal was there. When can we say we are a full stack developer? What projects needed to show do we need to show as a full stack developer? If you can build out an entire application with the back end and front end, you're a full stack developer. Doesn't mean you're a good one necessarily, but that's enough. You don't have to, I guess you're not gonna have to show projects to say that you're a full stack developer, but if you can build out anything, spin up your own server using something like Django and then provide that data, you're a full stack developer. Let's see, how secure is Django with basic settings listed in deployment checklist? The security is kind of a tricky one because no application is really secure. It's only as secure as you make it, but Django does already come with a lot of security integrated into it. So it depends on what you're trying to protect against. Now, if we're talking about XSS attacks or cross-site scripting attacks, Django already actually helps with security in one aspect. In this case, Django, what it does is it actually cleans your form data. So how cross-site scripting attacks work is basically, I mean, there's multiple ways, but it's basically a way to inject a script through a form, some kind of request to your server. So Django will actually, if you ever submit a form, unless you try to change it up a little bit or I guess override it, Django will already remove special characters. So things like angle brackets, any kind of special characters that may look like a malicious script. If you notice that, Django already cleans that for you. So let me try to, I can try to give you an example. So what I'll do here is I'm going to pull up an email. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to show my email in a stream, so never mind. But basically right now, if you submit an email on DennisIV.com, if you write in like a script tag, let's say you try to maliciously attack my website, and in here you say something like script, and then just go ahead and write this out. Let me zoom in here. So if we're trying to write this out, and then we'll just say alert, you have been hacked. So you try to do something like this. In theory, if my website wasn't properly secured, I would get this alert and it might actually trigger somewhere in my application or when I open up this email, and you can actually steal some information from me. But because of Django's forms, because I am using model forms to clean that data, Django already cleans that. So that's just one example of how it works. So if I go ahead and send this, I guess I don't want to fill out all this other information. This will not run. Django will take this and it will take that away. It just cleans all the data like that. And the message will just look funny. So what should I start with, Django or Flask? That's completely up to you. I'm going to be biased and say, why not start with Django? I think it's I'm not going to say better one, but I think you can go further with it. But Flask might be easier to start with. So if you struggle with Django, go ahead and go into Flask. Just get yourself up a site, launch the site, figure out how the routing system works. And then once you start with Django, it might make more sense to you. Let's see. I'm confused about that. Django already. So, oh, it looks like a response to somebody else. I don't want to jump in on that conversation. How to convert a Flask backend into a Django backend, any resources? I mean, there's no way of just automatically converting that. You would have to just build out the application. So I know Flask also, I believe, has models, or at least how they represent their data in classes. And I believe the ORM is SQL Alchemy. But you can just take all those same models because the database is still a relational database. You would have to take all those models and just convert them into a Django model, where all those classes, and turn them into a Django model. all your endpoints. It's completely different from Flask. Flask uses a routing system. Django uses the URL pattern. So you just have to like almost like a copy and paste and then just modify that data. But there is no way from what I've seen to automatically convert that. I might be wrong. I don't know. So let's see. How much JavaScript basics is required to jump into React with Django? So Django you want to keep Django out of the picture at this point. I mean, I guess if you're thinking of Django, as long as you know how to work with APIs, that's enough. That's enough JavaScript, I guess. Or let's see, how much JavaScript basics do I need to required to jump into it? So I would say once you understand the basics of JavaScript, you're pretty much ready for React. I don't see where Django comes in the picture here. If you understand, again, the functions, loops, all the basic concepts, how to make requests and so on, then you're kind of ready for a framework. I do understand there's people that start with React first, and that's kind of mind-boggling to me, just like the people that start with Django before Python. It's possible, but one issue I see with that and people trying to jump the gun too early is that they have a lot of issues that are Python related and they don't know it. So what I mean by that is they will send me errors, and I can't respond to emails nowadays when it comes to that. So sorry if I'm not responding to those, but I get countless emails, and I used to always get these that I would try to work with when I had time before. Syntax errors, indentation errors, things like this, because Django is written in Python. They would send me these errors and say, hey, I'm having this issue with Django. And I would look at it and I'm thinking, okay, that's not even a Django issue. That's a Python related issue. So if you can't differentiate what is, in this case, JavaScript and what is React, then you should probably go back to JavaScript, because in JavaScript, they're going to, let's say, have you create a component or a function-based component. What if you don't know what a function even is? Then you should probably go back and learn JavaScript. Once you understand what a function is, then a function-based component might make sense. So that's where I think once you understand the basics of it. So as long as you can work with the application, sometimes it helps to jump into the framework while you're learning the language. So if you're learning Python, you might struggle with when you're ready. So you could just go ahead and jump into Django, see if you can work with it. If things really don't make sense to you, jump back into Python, kind of feel it out. You'll have to go both ways. Let's see, Dr. Code here. Which problems do you face when you're deploying a full stack project generally? Let's see, problems. I guess when it comes to Django, a lot of beginners, this isn't something that I struggle with. I really don't struggle with these type of issues, I guess. It's a pretty simple concept at this point to me, but a lot of people struggle with debug mode when it comes to Django. Let's say, for example, your static files are working in production, you're working with your application, but once it comes to deployment, you deploy your application, you set debug to false, because you should always have debug set to false when your project is live. The reason for that is because you don't want end users seeing issues on your site. They can end up breaking a route and then seeing all your endpoints and so on. So once debug mode is set to false, what does this do? It automatically affects your static files. So static files don't work the same in debug mode as they do in production, or I guess in development. So that means that now you have to consider how you configure those static files, how you actually produce them, I guess. So one example would be Django is not built to serve static files, so you could use white noise. That's a package that actually helps you serve static files in production. But what if you have user-generated content? White noise isn't good for that, because now you actually need to store those somewhere. You need like a third-party place to actually store these files. That's where AWS comes in handy, the S3 buckets. So I would say static files in deployment, by far the biggest issue, to summarize that. I kind of went on a tangent, but I wanted to give an example. Open source contributions versus own full projects for getting a job. I mean, if you have your own projects, that's probably going to be better. But if you can show open source projects that you contributed to and show details in it, then that can be very helpful. Very specific details about what you did and what you contributed. For example, I have a developer working on Mumble. I keep referencing it because it's a good reference. Sharir Shuvo, he's a developer that designed this entire UI. He created Mumble UI. I don't know if we'll ever make that public, but I love it. I think it's beautiful. We have dark and white mode here. We can switch this. If Sharir goes in for an interview, he can show this and say, I worked on Mumble and I developed this entire UI. This would be something that would impress me if I was looking for a front end developer or a designer. I would be able to use this as an example and I guess qualify and prove his work. So this is an open source contribution, but it's pretty much like his own project. If somebody else integrated, as we start integrating the chat here, the live chat and the sockets, whoever helps integrate that can put that on their resume, show the Mumble project and say, hey, I contributed to this, and give very specific details to what you did there. Then in that case, I'm fine with it not being a full application, because I see that now you work with teams and you can actually build out something specific. It doesn't have to be your own project. So I would say your own project, but if you can contribute to open source and reference something and actually contribute a lot, then that can be very useful. Let's see. So a company sent me an interview invitation link. They mentioned they will ask about data structures, OPPS, and DMBS, but I don't know data structures. What should I do? Might not be the job for you. That's at some point, unless it's something you're willing to learn, something that you know, there needs to be a point where you need to be able to walk away from a job, I guess, or from an opportunity. One example for that is I had an opportunity to work with a development team from Apple. And these were a group of developers. I won't mention the company, but they were based in San Diego. And when I quit my job, I was just taking applications or taking interviews and just trying to see what the options were. And this company, this recruiter reached out to this company, and basically I met with this team of engineers from Apple, but they really didn't have a front-end developer, and they wanted me to lead the React side of their application. They wanted me to build out that part. I was capable of it. I didn't feel that comfortable in leading a project that big. They had startup money. They had like $8 million in startup cash. So it was a serious project. I didn't feel like, one, I wanted to work on something that intense. I wanted to step back a little bit and maybe do something like this on YouTube and start my own thing. And at the same time, I didn't feel like I would be the best fit for that company. So I was blatantly honest with them. And I said, I don't want to take the lead role because I don't think I'm the best person for this position. So if you don't know that, I would say start with coming clean with it, because they may still want you because of other skills or your interpersonal skills, but at least let them know, because not the worst thing, but something that would not be good would be to take that position, have the company rely on you for those skills, and then not be able to deliver. So yeah, I would come clean about it, or just not take that position if you feel like it's not something you're capable of. Let's see. So what functionalities must my app cover to be considered job ready? It always depends on the job, but in Django, I would say every beginner should understand the concepts of CRUD, create, update, and delete. You should be able to create your database with different types of relationships, the one-to-one relationships, one-to-many, many-to-many, basically architect the database, build out your project in multiple apps. Maybe some user authentication would be good, understanding how the Django REST framework works, configuring static files. I do know a lot of companies ask about tests, specifically writing unit tests. I've never really dealt with that issue, but a lot of companies may want you to know that. I don't think it's that big of a thing, but yeah, if you can build out the basic application with CRUD functionality, authentication, and configure static files all the way to deployment, you want to be able to deploy it. There's companies that may be fine with that. They may have somebody else working on that deployment process, but you're going to increase your chances if you can take a project from start to finish. I got burned out from programming. Do I look for a new technology? I'm assuming when you mean technology, you mean still in programming. No, I don't think that's the best route. I've also gotten burned out. Time off helps, even though I'm not good at that. Sometimes allowing yourself to dig around in a new technology helps, but you shouldn't blame the technology, because I think regardless of what language or framework you learn, you're always going to get to this point where you get burnt out with certain concepts. It's not always going to be easy. There's always going to be a concept that kind of just brings you down or you get stuck on. And I would say try to break that concept up into little bits, try to learn a new technology if it's fun for you. For example, for me, I like having a glass of wine and picking up a new framework or just watching a tutorial on something that I've never done before, just to unwind. But I still go back to what I know and I still go back to what I'm working on. I don't go away from my core stack. So I am going to have a Django course on Udemy coming soon. I'm having 2 Django courses. They're going to be developed around different projects. One will be on Udemy, and the other one is going to be almost like a bootcamp style course. It's going to be a higher price, but it's going to be on my own platform, and it's going to be a bootcamp with mentors or tutors. So when you take the course, you will have the option, or I don't know if I'll make it optional or not. You might just have to, that might just be worked into the price of the course, but there will be basically handwritten notes by these tutors, instructions as you go with the course, and then each person that buys the course will be assigned a tutor personally. And these are people that are vetted by me, and most of these people are actually people that have worked on this Mumble project right here. So there's a couple of developers. Praveen is actually one of them. So Praveen right here is an amazing Django developer, and he will be one of the tutors there. So basically, when you start taking the course, you can live chat with a tutor at any point. If you get stuck on a concept, you'll be able to work things out. But yeah, I will be working on that, or I am working on it right now. Let's see. So is it good to learn Django? Is it good to learn Django as a backend framework when I have no idea how backend works after some understanding of the front end? Yeah, I think so. I did it that way. I didn't really know web development concepts that well, and Django was how I learned how the backend works. I still am not that familiar with how Nginx works or how GUnicorn works, specifically packages within Django. But once I started using it, it made sense how the database is set up, how a server is spun up, and how URLs are connected, and so on. So yes, I think you can use Django to learn that. Can you suggest any projects? Depending on where you're at, I would start with the basics of like a to-do app just to understand CRUD functionality. Then I would go into things like social networking applications, e-commerce websites. E-commerce are really good because they cover so much, like in database designs and how you need to structure your application. So building out any e-commerce website, I think would be good. And I have a full, again, Django React course on Udemy, and then also a free course on YouTube, which is a 5-part video where we go from setting up and building our template to payment integration, but we don't include user authentication in that one. So how do we send HTTP only cookies to the front end? So usually you store HTTP only cookies. Well, I guess in HTTP only cookies, that's where you store the JSON web token. I'm trying to think of this. So we send it. So how can we send HTTP only cookies to the front end? Well, this is done in a response. So when you authenticate a user, you send a request to verify a user, and then in that you get a response of that cookie, and then you store it somewhere. So you get it by initially logging in. So that's how you send it from the back end to the front end. It's simply a response from the front end. It gets a little bit more technical. I was trying to simplify that, but that can get difficult. So can automate the boring stuff with Python be a book to learn Python for Django? Python for Django, yes, that's where I actually got my start. So I learned Python from Automate the Boring Stuff, and then I followed a couple of Corey Schaefer's tutorials. There is a part in there. Actually, it's not in that book. It's in the other book by John Duckett. But yes, I would say that's a good reference. That's enough Python to get started with Django. In there, you'll start from downloading Python, knowing how strings work, how lists work, what are functions, classes, and so on. Yes, that's actually a good book to reference. I don't think you need that book, but I think it's a good one if you want to go there. Okay, so as a developer, what are things you do before undertaking a project? So this is a good one. This is where a lot of people struggle. Before starting a project, I always start with all of the functionality that an application will have. So let's say let's keep using Mumble as an example. So this is a social network here. Let's say I'm about to build this, and this was exactly my thought process. Okay, so we're going to need to first create users. We're going to need those users to have the ability to modify their profiles. We're going to need to create a following system so users can follow each other. And I also need to know how to render certain users' information when I follow that user. So for example, if I follow Praveen right here, I want to be able to render out Praveen's information. So when I'm developing an application, I think about all the functionality, and I go through a checklist and figure out, do I know how to build out all of those concepts? If yes, I'm good. I go on to the next step. If not, I start learning those concepts, or I put those on the back burner until I learn them, or until I run into those problems and I actually need to figure those out. After that, what I do is I typically start with building out rough prototypes of what I'm trying to accomplish. So in this case, before I build out this entire application, I don't start with designing the template. I did design it, and then Sharir actually ended up rebuilding this entire UI, but I start with the backend functionality. So I just go into the database. I start designing the data structure, because that is one of the most important parts of any application. Once you build that in, it's really hard to start modifying your data structure, especially once your application's users start growing. So I'll go into designing the database. I'll build out 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe prototypes, and I just stress test it, because it's so hard to know what an application will look like in the end until you actually start building it. We can always have a theory or an idea in your mind, but most problems you run into, you won't even know that you'll have them until you build it. So I'll typically start designing all the pages, the database, not designing and styling them, but I'll start figuring out what I need for this project, and then undertaking little components of that. When I get stuck in one part, let's say in one version of my demo, I'll typically spin up another version of that same project and try to focus on a different aspect, and then eventually marry all those projects together. So I start with the database, and then I start by designing it and then building it, but building it in a sandbox environment. Because if you give yourself that freedom and knowing that this is not the final application, this is just a testing environment, you're less likely to get stressed out by it. You just kind of have fun with it and test out concepts and make sure they work, and then eventually polish them, refine your code, and then keep refining it. Let's see this one. So I have a small e-commerce project for a client, backend only, with order, car, email, auth, payment integration. So am I job ready for Django? Yes and no. If let's say I needed you to work on an application for me, if I needed you for a specific part, let's say this authentication part, I would say, do you know how to authenticate users? Maybe I don't want to work on that part of the application. I can hire you just for authentication and payment integration. So I would say, yes, you are job ready, but it's never as simple as that. So I think somebody may look at these skills, see what you've done with it, and consider that enough. Let's see. If I use React with Django, does most logic will be based in React or JavaScript? Yes and no. I would say your interactions on the front end, so your UI will usually be stored in the front end, or that's where all the logic will be contained. But I typically try to perform all of the functionality in the back end. So for example, if we're searching a user, let's test this. When I hit search here, so let's just say I start searching up a user, React isn't doing all the searching here. What's happening here is on every click here, the functionality is being sent to the backend. So let's actually, where the API call is being sent to the backend, and we filter that data in the backend. The reason for this is that it would be too much of a load on the front end to have to filter that data, meaning returning back, let's say we have 10,000 users. We don't want to load in all the users in the front end and then try to filter down in the front end and do all that, I guess, right away, because now we're calling too much data. We're loading up our database here, or our server. So we make the call, we filter it in the backend, and then we return a response. So let's go here. Let's go to network. Let me try to refresh this, and let's start searching. So why is my network not showing? Oh, it looks like I was searching something. So look at this. So let's just go ahead and hit D. We're looking at this, and we're seeing requests. Right now, we're seeing some errors. We're working on it. But with every request, we are sending a call back to this endpoint, not this one. So that's to search users. We're making a call to this endpoint right here. Let me zoom in. And this is how we're searching the users. So the logic is actually on the back end. We're not putting the load up on the front end here. We're sending a request. So let's try that one more time. Let's just open this up. And with each click, we're seeing another call made. So we can see the request count go up there. I don't know if you can see that, but pay attention to that right there. So there we go. So yeah, it's on the back end usually. Okay, let's see. My browser can't play this video. I can watch other video, but not this one. Weird. Huh, that's weird. So I guess the live stream won't work. What is an endpoint? That's funny. We're going through a whole little session here. An endpoint is simply a URL. So let me just pull this up again. I'll actually pull up the Mumble API right now. So let's just do Mumble api.herokuapp.com. So an endpoint is simply a URL that we can use to get data from. So let's say we want to get all of our users. Let me find a backend that doesn't require us to be authenticated. So we'll go into this one right here. So we'll go to mumble.herokuapp.com, and then we'll go to /API/users. So this is an endpoint, and this is for those of you that were asking what an API is. This is how we return that data. So this data gets sent to the front end. And if you look at this page right here, this is what we're working with. So we see this list right here, all these users. This is what the users look like when we make that call. So we see the user ID, the profile picture, where we're getting that picture, the skills this user has, the name. So let's just find this user. There we go. So we see that user, it's returned in JSON data. We see all the followers, information about that user. And yeah, that's what an endpoint is. MERN roadmap, I would say look up Brad Traversy's courses for this. That's not my stack, so I don't really spend much time there, but I would vouch for his content. So how much is Django used in the industry in your country? Quite a bit. I mean, I mentioned examples earlier, but Instagram, Dropbox, Pinterest, Udemy, there's a lot of them. But yeah, there's quite a bit of big companies that use it. If we're looking at if you want to test that out, go into the job market, go to Stack Overflow jobs, any LinkedIn jobs, look up Django, and you can see what your market is like. And I can always find jobs for Django. Let's see. So were you doing it full time? I'm not sure if that was a reference to me or not. I'm assuming that's a response to a chat. So I don't know if it's the best hosting platform. I mean, there's DigitalOcean, there's Heroku, AWS using EC2. But I use Heroku a lot, and I use AWS in combination. Those are my favorite, but I wouldn't say those are the best necessarily. Let me just get this screen back up here. So a microservice, I've had this asked before. A microservice is simply a different part of your application built out in its own, I guess, as its own component. So think about it this way. When you're building out your application, let's say you want to build out your instant messaging. You want users to be able to chat between each other and have a live feed. You can build out your application. You can have all your users, but let's say Django isn't the best for building out live chats. You might want to use something like Node.js for that. So what you could do is build out just that chat system as its own application. So it's a microservice. So it's like, think about it as a part. So that's why we say micro, a part of your application. So you build it out completely on its own, and then you have that microservice handle the chat application. So it integrates into your entire application, but it's built completely as its own thing. So that means when your website goes down, not everything goes down, just that part of your site goes down too. So that's one reason why you might want to use it. Another one is to split up your code. So yeah, microservice is, it's like building out a part of your application completely separately. So for me, I have a video on this. It took me 3 months to become effective with Django. That's the best way to say it. To really learn it, I'm still learning it every day, but about 3 months is when I was ready to actually build out a real application. Let's see. So yeah, I have a Discord server. It's not just for me. It's actually the Mumble one. I can post that in the chat here or maybe in the video description. Or just go to that Mumble GitHub account. That's for the Mumble team, but anybody can join it. Just make sure it's relevant to Mumble. That's where you can connect with other developers. Oh, I see Praveen is in here. So let's imagine Node.js has been used for notifications with the Django site. Okay, so I'm assuming Praveen is responding to that microservices question here. Okay, let's see. So, hello, Dennis. I have a question. How can I create one event with the Google Calendar API in Django? I have already the function, but I don't know how to call her in Django template to create event. So you're using the Google Calendar API to connect it with Django. I don't see where Django would come into the picture here. So if you're already connected to the API, I'm assuming you're already providing your access tokens or your account, whatever kind of information you have. That's just between JavaScript and the API then to make that work. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question. I'm doing really good. So thank you, Tamid. I'm guessing I'm trying to pronounce that right. Let's see. So do I need to learn databases as a Django developer? Yes. I'm sure there's always situations where you can get away without knowing it. But yeah, you're going to be designing databases. It doesn't mean you have to go take a full course. This is what I always want to make sure people don't do, is I want to make sure they don't go and start taking an 8-hour course on Free Code Camp on databases. Now, that's not going to hurt, but you don't have to know every single part of databases and all that. Start with the simple stuff. You can even learn it as you start with Django. So, because you are going to be working with databases. Anything you do, you're going to be calling data. There's no reason to use Django if you're not going to have data in your application. Might as well use WordPress for that. Or just use some kind of front-end framework to call an API. So this is a technical question, but what's the difference between action / in quotes or just that? So if you look at this one right here, action with the / means that post or that form is going to be sent to the base URL. So for example, let's say you have website.com. So the first option, action, will send that request to the URL of your domain. So it's going to be the home page. If you do action with nothing in that, then you are going to send that URL to the same URL that you are on in the current page. So for example, let's say you're on website.com / create user. When you submit this form in the second option where it's action with an empty string, that URL is going to take, that form is going to take that same URL that you currently have in the browser and send it back to action / create user or whatever your URL path is. So one sends you to the home page, one sends you to the original page that you are on. Thanks for joining, by the way, guys. This is the longest solo stream I've done. It's super nerve-wracking for me. I'm trying to keep up with the chat, keep it relevant and entertaining. But as I mentioned when I first started the stream, when something scares me, I tend to try to do it. I don't want to walk away from it. This concept scares the crap out of me, so I would just rather jump into the water and make it happen, and eventually I'll get used to it. I'm glad, DK. Thank you. I'm glad the stream was helpful. I'm trying to keep it entertaining and useful. Thank you, Tommy. Okay, let's see. What projects to do or how to get a job as a Django developer. So I'm going to start with the basics. We've kind of went into this. I don't want to keep repeating it, but anything that can start you or get you familiar with CRUD, create, update, and delete functionality, anything like a to-do app. If you know that, you're past the basics. That's not a good application. It's just something that can help you get started. Any application that can get you working with static files. So an e-commerce website. I mean, honestly, I would say start with the to-do app and then an e-commerce website. Go through those two. You're going to learn so much about Django in that process. If you can do those two, it'll take you a while to figure that out. You know, it'll be time, but those two will really give you the core fundamentals of it. So which is more wanted framework, Angular or React? It feels like React is more popular at this point. I'm honestly becoming a Vue fan, even though I haven't been that into it. Praveen has been talking it up to me, and I'm kind of going back and forth with it. But yeah, anyways, I stick to React because it's popular, but Angular I know is more heavy, I guess. It requires a little bit more of a knowledge base. React is easier to get started, but I think React at this point is more popular. I would Probably just Google that up. So React versus Angular. I'll look up at the job market, but okay, so let's try doing this. We'll just go to some trends here and let's see what we have. Here's just an article. Usually you'll see some kind of trend line like this right here. Apparently to this one in star history view. Oh, that's view. Okay, why is Angular red? I don't know if I really trust that graph. I'm going to try another one because that doesn't really look that accurate. Yeah, so it seems like React is usually staying pretty far ahead. It's pretty steady when it comes to the two. Let me just try to open up this image. It's funny because React is usually blue and Angular is red, but the trend line, I guess that's just Google Trends. But yeah, I think that's probably the best way to answer it. Love React. Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I didn't like it at first. The biggest issue was the fact that you have to learn things the React way. One example was I had this application built out and Praveen is saying Vue is more popular than React. I don't know if I believe that graph. Maybe in recent days, Praveen, but I don't know. Doesn't seem that way. Anytime I do a poll or anything like that, I know I try to keep it non-biased, but from what I've seen in the public, React has it. Oh, so okay. So back to my question. What was that? React and I guess the issues with having to learn things the React way. This is one issue with front-end frameworks. One example was, or two examples, PayPal integration, Google Maps. So when I finally learned Google Maps, if you go into the documentation, Google Maps tells you how to integrate with their API the standard way. They try to keep it language agnostic or framework agnostic, and they teach you how to connect with it using JavaScript and so on. Once you start connecting that to a framework, you have to learn how to do it the framework's way. So when I tried to change my application to use Google Maps inside of React, it meant that I had to learn how React connects to the Google Maps API, as opposed to just understanding how the API works. So that's always been an issue with me. And then at the same time, PayPal too. I have a tutorial right now on how to integrate PayPal into an application. But when I was doing my Django and React course, I had to completely relearn and figure out how to do it the PayPal way. It's kind of, I guess, a small thing to deal with, but it is a little bit frustrating. Praveen saying, see the GitHub stars. I don't know if it's the best way to track the traction, I guess, or to see what does it. I mean, I would go by jobs. GitHub stars is one way to do it, but I'd probably stick to what the job market's offering. And I had to put somebody in a timeout. Sorry, I don't want to do that, but if you keep spamming the chat, I'm going to have to do that because it's not fair to everyone else. And I'm trying to get to everything. I just don't want to flood the chat with somebody's messages. So hope you don't take that too personally, but there's nothing else I can do. So I love the simplicity of React, but I do see limits. I don't necessarily see limits. I mean, it seems like Vue is a little bit more, I mean, React is more opinionated. Vue is more free in that sense, but I don't know what you mean by limits because I don't really think there's anything you can't do with it. Almost at 300 likes, and it's called, thank you. I didn't realize that. I'm not watching the chat itself, so. Praveen, if you want to hop on, send me a message on Discord. I actually wouldn't mind having you on here if you want. Here, let me try to change my screen. It's a relaxing Sunday, so I'm just enjoying myself here. Cool to get used to this and try to break in the solo streams. Okay, React.js roadmap for Django newbie. I don't really know how to get back into this roadmap. I think if you know the basics of Django, let's just put it this way, you need to, if you want to use React and Django together, you're going to need to know Django, basically all the core fundamentals of CRUD, static files, and so on. Then you are going to need to learn how to use the Django REST framework. If that's the way you go, you could build out an API in another way, but you'll need to know Django and the Django REST framework. Let's just say that that's it. You need to know how to make the API. Once you know how to make the API, learn JavaScript. Then once you learn JavaScript and how to make those calls and connect to it, you can go into React. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. And Praveen, just messaged me here. Let me send him an invite. Okay, he's going to join the stream here in a second. So Praveen, just to talk him up, Praveen is one of the core, he's actually one of the lead developers on the Mumble project. So if you have questions, I don't want to say go ask him because I don't want to flood his inbox, but he's an insanely smart developer, very talented, is super helpful, and he's the type of developer I would hire in a heartbeat. And I'm probably going to be hiring him. He is a paid developer on the Mumble team, but he's somebody that just takes charge. Anytime an issue comes up, he's already got the solution for me. He's already given me ideas. That's a great example of somebody that can lead. And whether he knows it or not, he's a leader, and I admire that. But just wanted to give him a background before he jumps on. He's probably getting his mic and his headset ready. Okay. Let's see. Someone's saying, do we need to know Jamstack? I don't know Jamstack, so what did I... Let's see, what's this question saying? Do you know about live code? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Like coding live, or is that a specific thing? Here, let me get my headset. Praveen's about to join, so it's 10 or 12 p.m. on a Sunday here, so I think some of you guys are already in a different time zone, but hey, what's up, Praveen? You're it looks like you're muted.
Hey man, how are you going?
What's going on? Doing good. What time is it there?
Is it 9:40 here?
9:40 a.m.?
Yeah. Nah, PM.
Oh, PM. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So you're still you pretty much woke up. I know you sleep during the day and code at night. You're what do you call it? A vampire.
Yeah, I just woke up and I just woke up and had a dinner, and now when I just woke up I saw your notification and I joined.
Nice. Let's
So
see.
why
So
not
I'm
just answer some questions.
Yeah, I've been trying to keep up with the chat's going quick. So if you have something you want to jump into, I keep referring to the Mumble project just because it's such a good example for everything. I'm so pumped about that. We've been working on that tirelessly. So let's see.
It got everything that we need to talk about. Like people want to talk about full stack, endpoint, REST API, like everything. So in that project, we have everything set up, and people can easily look at that. It's open source basically, and ask questions about that, so we can answer, and people can have a good idea about that.
Yeah, so that's a really good thing that you said there. That was one of our like main reasons to starting that was that I wanted something that can be focused specifically on Django, and I wanted something that people can reference source code too. Because if I put together a tutorial, most tutorials are going to cover like 30% of what a project actually takes. They're usually going to be dumbed down. They're going to be simplified because there's just so much to do. But with Mumble, what you get is an entire application enhanced. It's optimized. Like our code is really clean. Cody's done a really good job cleaning up that code. We put everything into separate files. Like it's done how a team would build it. So that's like the core idea behind Mumble is so you can go into that. So if anybody has questions about how React and Django work together, how APIs work together, I'll probably put together a video on how to like download Mumble, how to deploy it locally and all that. But wow, you're going to learn a lot because I have learned so much, specifically Praveen, actually from you in writing tests and how we configured the live database and local database. Freaking amazing. So that was a core idea to the project. I'm so glad we did it and it turned out way better than I imagined.
Yeah, I'm glad that you like my skills.
How would you describe an API? Because I keep seeing people ask that. How would you summarize it? Like, because there's always like the stereotypical answer, oh, it's a way to connect data together, but that doesn't really make sense to people, to some people, I guess.
Yeah, like API is can be referred in two ways. Like when you have a Stripe.js and you have a Django. So if you want to connect your Django with Stripe, so you don't need actually a REST API at all. So what you do is you just connect them using thanks for that. Thank you, Daniel. I just got distracted.
I'll turn it up.
So when you have a Stripe Stripe API endpoint in your Django and you have actual Stripe SDK. So you just make them talk together, and you don't actually necessarily need the JSON REST API. So you are just sending data and pulling some data. So you are validating data either, or whatever you are doing. So whenever there is an exchange in data, so that's where you can call that you can making a call to an API.
Yeah,
I
and
think that's not the best option. That's not the best explanation, but that will
no,
clear out something.
that makes sense. I mean, it's really hard to explain it. I know when Brad and I were making the course for the Django and React course, we were trying to explain Redux, and Brad said it right. He's like, I pretty much guarantee you, anybody that you explain Redux to the first time is not going to understand it. It's something that you have to look at, you have to try it, you have to see it in action in order to actually fully grasp the concept. But yeah, that's why the answer of like it's a way for applications to communicate between each other. That's why that answer is good, but it's not because it's right, but it doesn't really explain it in detail. So I would say like once you start working with it, self-taught programmer. I've seen your comments. Thank you so much. That's really inspiring. I've seen your channel actually. I think I'm definitely subscribed to it. If I looked at it, I subscribed to it, but we'll have to connect someday. But yeah, so that example, I mean, like that's the best way you said it is Stripe or PayPal right now. Like we need a way to get our Django application to connect to a PayPal, right? Like when somebody fills out their credit card information, hits go, how does our application know where to send that information? We need to be able to authenticate who users are, where that money's going to. We need what we'd call an endpoint. I had to go over that briefly, but an endpoint and where that data is going. Why do you say why do you say Vue is better than React? I know this is. I just want to throw that in because I love the controversy in this case. From what I'm seeing, are you judging that by GitHub stars? Not better, I guess, but popular.
Yeah.
Are you judging that by GitHub stars, or are you going by trends?
Trends are really going up for Vue, and I know that market is full for React, but people are slowly adopting Vue.js, and recently Vue 3 came out, and now more and more people are getting into Vue.js.
Why do you think that is? What's your obsession with Vue? Why do you not obsession, but why do you like it so much?
Yeah, I like that so much because it's a proper framework. Like if you go with like Flask, then it's not a proper framework. So you mostly have to do a thing out of thing manually. Like you have to sometime do the authentication stuff, database connection, and that kind of stuff. But in Django, we all have that setup. So Vue.js is a proper framework in which I think most of the things are already done, which I really don't know in specific, but I have noticed that just when I started with React, but I didn't like that. So I don't hate React, but I love Vue.js more than anything.
So what's an example then? You're saying it's a more proper framework. So I mean, you gave me some, but so Vue or Angular is very opinionated. React is more lightweight, but it's not as opinionated. Is Vue more lightweight or less lightweight than React? How would you say? Because from what I've seen, it seems like it's less light or it's more lightweight, so it's less opinionated.
Yeah, Vue.js is a combination of Angular and React. So in Angular, like you can use CDN, and in React you use CLI. So in Vue.js you can use both, and in Angular you use HTML directives, and in React you use I think JSX, and but in like Vue.js you can use both of them. You can use directive, and with like two-way binding you can also use JavaScript expression in the HTML, I think.
Gotcha. Okay. So Praveen, while we're on the stream, since it's about roadmap, being a full stack roadmap, or a full stack developers roadmap, you want to give yours. And before we, if you want to, go ahead, let me know. But what I'm also going to do is link up your YouTube channel because Praveen is a freelancer. He's working on the Mumble team. He's getting more active on YouTube. Very bright developer. So I would love to hear your story on that if you are willing to share it. How about let's start from HTML and CSS. Well, actually, you're not that experienced in it. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I can start all the way from the beginning. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I will just shut down my camera because it is very high, as you can see that. I will fix that, and just to give me a second.
Sure, no problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up your YouTube channel. we talked about this before. I already had you on, but how do you spell your last name? I'll look you up.
Malaysia.
Here, I'm gonna link it up in the stream. I'm excited to hear the story because I know you're freelancing. You clearly have experience. I want to know where you learned it and so on. Okay.
Just a second.
Let me see how I can add this. If I can add this into the description.
My camera got stuck.
Let's see. I'll try to go into some questions here in the chat. So
You can go through the comment section for now.
Your thumbnail is very easy to understand. I think you mean by the pictures, like just drawing out the roadmap. I'm glad. Thank you. What is the Mumble team? So the Mumble team is the Mumble project. So it's the social network. We're still developing it right now. It's using Django. And I just call it the Mumble team because those are all the developers working there. Someone says 404 Praveen not found. So let's see. So that means now alternative suggestion is Vue.js plus Django. Yeah, that is a route. Praveen is actually building out the Vue version of Mumble. So we have it in React. The front end is using React, but Praveen really likes Vue. So what we decided was, hey, let's just build out 2 versions of it. We're going to stick to React, but if for some reason we end up switching to Vue, then we could, or deciding to switch it, then we can do that. We probably won't, but the beauty of that is that there's always that version that we can practice on. The core idea behind Mumble was to make it a demo application that we can test on. So yeah, that's kind of the idea behind it. So yeah, Praveen, how did you get started? And like, what's your roadmap look like? You don't have to go through every stack, but tell us about your experience from timeframes to now.
Yeah, I just started in 2017, and that was my first semester of my college. And I talked to one of the senior, and I asked him if he can make a calculator or not. He was in his master's, and he said, "No, I can't make a calculator." And I was surprised. Man, you're doing master's and you can't even make a calculator. So what does that college teach you? He just smiled and walked away. And then I was like, oh damn, I have to do something about it, and I just can't rely on our education system. And so at that night I promised myself that I have to do something. So it was 10 p.m. of the night, and all shops or stationery shops were closed. And I just walked through a random stationery store, and I requested them to open that. And I bought a notebook for that, and I started writing Python concepts. And I did that for 3 days, and I write basically all of the Python core concept, like what are keywords, what are functions, like all of the basics things. And after that, I started I was just going through the basics. And after some time, I bought a laptop. My father bought me a laptop, and I started I don't know what was his name, like Santidex, I think.
Zendex?
That's the name. Yeah. So I started watching his videos, and he's just amazing. He's really amazing. And
Yeah.
I watched his videos and started working on some and then eventually I made a game, which was a card game. You can say shuffle, which we do. I think you got it.
Yeah. Sorry. Was that a question? I didn't catch it.
I was asking. So with Python, I just made a console game, which was a card deck game.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. And from that, my oops concepts was really getting. You can say, what should I call that?
So
my oops concept were at very peak. I don't know what to say there.
Are you saying
the shop and
the object-oriented concepts? Is that what you're referring to when you're saying ops?
Yep.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. So you're learning Python. Okay. It's funny because anytime I was building out, I was doing blackjack, chess, that was probably one of the toughest concepts to figure out, was building out those classes and those objects. So just to kind of recap, you said you were a CS student. Is that correct? I didn't catch that.
Yep, I am
So,
CS student.
so you went to was it a professor? Was that correct?
No, that was my senior. I was living out in a apartment
Uh-huh.
out from my house, and there was some seniors living inside that, and he
Oh,
met
I
me
see.
in college, and I asked him, "Man, what are you doing?" He said, "Good, okay. So can you make a calculator?" And that's
Gotcha. Okay, so you basically, I like what you said. You want to challenge the education system and basically said, if they can't teach you how to
yeah,
make something that simple, I got to do something. So you got into
yeah.
Python. You started making games. How long did it take you to grasp Python? What would you say the time frame is there?
Yeah, like while completing my graduation, it took me 2 years because I rarely do. I rarely did Python because in a month you can say I used to do like 2 to 3 hours in a month.
Wow. So you say
Usually,
2 years to master Python? Is that it? Or because it seems like
yeah.
because you probably got the concepts quicker than that. Is that just something that you worked on? Would you say that you needed all 2 years, or is that really how long it took you to learn it, or is that just how long you kept working
Yeah,
with it?
that took me personally. So you don't need actually 2 years to master that. All you need is just give your time and dedication, and it will take just maximum 4 months, maximum to maximum 4 months.
Yeah.
And in minimum amount will be like in 2 months you can grab everything.
Hmm. Yeah, that's kind of been my experience. I think it was like a month for me. So how did you start with Django then? Because I'm looking at your Django skills and you're on top of it. Like how long have you been doing that? Like right now on Mumble, I'm not saying you're the most, qualified developer, but you've been the most active. From what I've seen, you've been the most active in producing the insights and all that. And I love how you react to things and how you lead the team there. But yeah, how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, I started. So there is a channel on YouTube which is naming CS Dojo, and I was really impressed by his skills and his videos. And he said that if you wanna go start, in that video, in one of his video, he talked about like I have done Python. Now what? What should I
Mm,
do? Like, how should I work on this project? Did I have to make these console games? And no, all the time, nah, you are not going to do that. So he said that yeah, you have to build some like websites, or you can say machine learning projects. So for that, he recommended either you should use Flask or Django, and
mm,
I researched about them, and I really like Django because that's come with, as you most of the viewers know, that it really comes with quite a lot of features, and you don't
yeah.
have to manually do that. So I started with Django, and it was really painful for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my thing when it came to choosing between the two. And that's kind of what it comes down to. It's usually people that say, okay,
Mm,
Django has a higher barrier to entry. It's a little bit more difficult. Like, I mean, I think it was pretty quick. It took me a couple of days to figure it out. But
mhm,
I just saw the power in how Django puts everything into one package, but yet it's also easy to separate things out. It doesn't confine you too much. It's a little bit opinionated, but you still have the freedom to do what you need. And what I like about that for beginners
mhm.
is the fact that you can almost be guided into the direction that you need. You don't have to, like with Flask, you can make a lot of mistakes, and a lot of beginners sometimes don't know what they don't know. But by having a framework that is more opinionated, it forces you to do things the right way, like separating things out into apps, how the
Yeah,
URL routing works, and so on. Yeah. So when was that? When was
it
that?
was,
The original time, or from when you started learning Django? What year was that?
I think that the end of 2019.
2019.
I found the Justin Mitchell channel, and I downloaded his I think that's a 2 or 3 hour video with Try Django, in which he
Yeah.
talked about like blog post. He made a blog post app, and
It's like
I
try
just
Django
downloaded that.
2.2.
Yeah, I just downloaded that video, took that offline, and started like watching that. Like firstly, I don't like to go with like follow step. Like if someone is like guiding you how to do that, I just don't do like straight on my keyboard and okay, let's start
Mm,
doing that. So firstly what I will do is watch the full video. Okay, what are you going to have at the end of the video? Like at the end, which skills are you going to have? Like you will have everything in your mind, like what you are going to learn from this and what you are not going to learn. So I watched that whole video, and after that I rewatched that video, and I followed along, and that's made me more Django concept clear.
Yeah. Are you watching that in regular speed or 2x speed?
For like when I was new to Django, I used to watch at 1x speed, and now I use mostly watch at 2 point or 2.5.
I love the concept that you referenced. My dad actually taught me that. He'd basically say,
Uh,
when I was going to college, because I went to college when I was still in high school, and it wasn't for computer
mhm,
science or anything like that. But he'd always say, read the material before the class starts, and the reason to that is because it creates familiarity, even if you don't get the concept. So what I would do is kind of like what you said: is before you start with the course, and turn it on, follow it, and start coding with it. What I would do is I'll try to watch that course in 2x
mhm,
speed, usually all the way through. And I would watch it while I'm taking a walk. And that means I don't even really have to
mhm,
see what I'm working on, but you'll be surprised in how well you can actually follow along with something. That doesn't mean that I'm going to grasp concepts either. But once I go
mhm.
through it, I can see, okay, what's the end product? How does the structure look? So once we actually start the video, things are a little bit more familiar and you just pick it up faster than you realize. So yeah, trying to watch it all the way through first. In my case, it was 2x speed. Well, yeah, that's interesting. So 2019, you're pretty dang advanced from what I'm seeing, and how much you're contributing to the project. You're definitely a quick learner, that's for sure. I'm surprised with your Python timeframe. I thought it'd be longer, but it seems like once you got Python, because you know Python very well, and that probably gave you really good core concepts, I guess.
Yeah, I used to watch that Django video, and I didn't grab that. I didn't understand fully for 2 or 3 months. So when the pandemic started, like college were shut it down, and I was just free all time on my in my home. And what I did, what I found was your channel, and that was pretty amazing. So I saw your videos, and like most of the videos, so all of your tutorials, and started following them. And after following your like shopping, what was that, e-commerce
The,
website
yeah.
tutorial, and that made me everything clear about Django.
Hmm.
Like how you have to use DRY concept, like you don't have to repeat everything in your
Yeah.
like you don't have to
Yeah.
repeat everything in your code, and a template extending. And I thought that you use them, but
Yeah, I did
yeah.
inheritance, and I love that concept too. That's always interesting to show in tutorials because sometimes it feels like you are extending the tutorial, but it's so necessary. A lot. I mean, I guess if you're experienced, you probably shouldn't be following my tutorial regardless because you should already know it. But what Praveen is referencing is the idea of how I would write out, and I don't think the application is by any means perfect. There's actually concepts that I think can be fixed up there, but I would write out code and I would like repeat the same code in views. And as I'm like writing it, I keep telling the audience in the video, and I keep saying, hey, like, we're going to fix this. Don't worry, we're going to fix this. And then later on, what I would do is write out the same concept, and then I would copy code from multiple views, put it into one function, and then explain the concept of dry, which is don't don't repeat yourself. So
Yeah.
I love showing that in tutorials because if I start making things dry right away, then
Hmm.
people may not understand the value in what I'm actually trying to show. But I'm trying to
Yeah.
show you the tough way of doing things and then fix it for you. Because if I make it easier
Yeah.
right away, you may not fully understand the value. So yeah, let me go back into these comments here. So let's just see. Rami, thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of the support that I get. Keep seeing these in the comment section. Thank you guys. So let's see. Hey Dennis, why don't you create an advanced Django tutorial here on YouTube? I can't find any channel that uses advanced stuff and only shows the basics. The issue with this is a concept. This is kind of how the market, I guess, works. If I make something too advanced, I mean, if you go through my channel and you go through the advanced concepts, I need to. This is a career path for me. It's a job. It's something that has to create income. I can't do this for free. Everybody needs to put food on the table. If I make concepts that are too advanced, it doesn't get views. So what has to happen here is advanced concepts have to go into paid courses, because there's just no way of justifying me pouring in hours of research, hours of structuring something to put it online, and in ad revenue, I'll make $3. I can't work for free. So that's kind of the frustrating part. I would love to do that, but go through my channel, find advanced concepts like deploying a Django application, and they have the least amount of views compared to any other video. If I put up more basic level stuff, it gets all the views. So that's where that kind of stuff has to be reserved for paid content. I do try to put up advanced content, but you have to understand that we all need to eat at the end of the day. So we can't afford to just work for free. And that's kind of the issue with advanced concepts. Doesn't mean they're not going to come out, but yeah, it's just something that's harder. So let's see, which is good to use function-based views or class-based views. So this answer is always funny to me, because I use both. I always tell beginners, start with function-based views. It's where you should start. And then you have the people, well, you need to use function or class-based views because they're more advanced. Not necessarily. They have more advanced concepts, but it depends on what you're trying to do. Both will accomplish the same tasks. Class-based views are a more advanced concept, but I would say stick to what you know, try to learn both, and eventually you might find yourself migrating to class-based views, but don't get into that camp of trying to pick one or the other. I think it's silly. Do whatever works, but I would say learn class-based views, but don't stress yourself about it. Just to, like, as one example, I've built, the application that I built out and sold was all function-based views. Like, it worked. The product worked. It sold. So yeah. Let's see. So
yeah, I just made that Fiverr clone with function-based views.
Yeah.
All of that.
Well, just to get back to that, I want to pull this up again. I've said this story before. I think it was in my class-based views video, and basically when I started with function-based views, and around like the 6-month mark, I was like, okay, I'm a little bit more advanced as a Django developer, and I should probably start using class-based views because that's what advanced developers do. So I just assumed it was the next step. So I got my application and I just started rewriting all of my views into class-based views. The only problem with that is I didn't know class-based views that well. I knew how they worked, but when it came time to really customize something, because most of the views work fine, but when it comes time to customizing them, you really have to know how they operate. So there was parts of the application that ended up breaking because I didn't understand class-based views that well. And this is like 6 months into that path or that experience in building out this product. I ended up having to rebuild all the views back into function-based views and then slowly integrate class-based views into it. So that's why I'm so strict on saying don't learn them and use them just because everyone says. Use what you're comfortable with, build what you can, use what you can do to complete an application, and then try to add them because they are valuable, but don't add them just because that's what I did. And I ended up spending, I don't know how many weeks in fixing that issue caused by thinking I need to use function-based or class-based views.
Yeah, that's correct. You don't need to waste your time unnecessarily.
Yeah, no, it'll work, especially in the job market. I mean, here's the thing. It also depends on the route. I mean, if you're freelancing, you can be fine with function-based views, but most jobs you're going to go to, they're probably going to want you to understand class-based views, like more often than not. So I would say you pretty much need them for a job, at least to understand the concepts and how to operate. Somebody's saying, bring on another Django developer on the stream so we can hear their stories. Yeah, this is Praveen. So I guess here is one. I'll try to do that more often. I'm still trying to test out my channel, and like I enjoy the stream so much because I like when I'm asking the person questions, whoever I have on, any guest, it's just as entertaining to me as it is to everybody watching. Like I love it. So, but I'm also trying to keep the channel consistent with quality content and relevant. So yeah, I'll try to continuously do that. How do you manage back pain from sitting in a chair for a long time? Stretch a lot. I actually have a lot of back pain. Sit up straight, stretch a lot. Physical exercise is the only thing that I can see.
Same, man. I just bought this type of chair. You can bought this same, or you can just try to bring this same in your house, and I think that will help you keeping your back pain off from the body.
So we've already answered this question right here, JS before, how much JS before React. Just don't want to go into that one again. Do yoga, someone says. Yeah. So Praveen, I'm probably going to end the stream. We're almost about 2 hours. I enjoyed doing the solo stream for a bit. That was kind of fun, but yeah, I just want to go over my roadmap, and I don't know if I'll keep this video on after, because I always want to make sure that my streams have quality content, and this one's kind of long and we kind of jumped all over the place. So we'll see,
Yeah.
but I'll keep it up for a little bit, and then I might end up taking it down, so it's not just flooding my channel with stuff. But yeah, thanks for joining, Praveen, especially on such short notice. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you guys enjoy these streams. We'll go ahead and end the broadcast.